for the interest of time, we're going to start things off as we've typically done, gone around the room and quickly done an introduction. Again, my name is Mallory Ackerman. I am the Convention Sales Director at Visit Fargo Moorhead.
Spectacular. No, that's okay. Emma McIntyre, Manager of Development for Folkways.
Kate Ballstead, Events and Marketing Specialist for the Southeast Education Cooperative.
Mayor.
Denise Kolpeck, Fargo City Commission.
Jim Gilmore, City of Fargo staff.
Dave Pepcorn, Fargo City Commission.
Taylor Snelling, Mezzaluna, and the drawing room.
Claire Hughes, Clubhouse Hotel and Suites.
Joe Raso, Greater Fargo Moorhead EDC.
And Mike Rethinger, City of Fargo staff.
And I believe we have 3 online. Can you quickly just shout out? Eric, you want to start?
Sure. Eric Johnson, Fargo Assistant City Attorney.
Kent, Shannon, are you guys online?
Yep, Kent Kolstead, President of Livewire.
Okay, maybe Shannon will be joining us in a bit. How about Tom? Are you available online? Are you joined the conversation yet? Tom Hazinski? Okay, well, hopefully Tom will join us in a little bit. He is the President and Managing Director of HVS, so he'll be joining the call here in a while. So first I wanted to just quickly give an overview of our itinerary for our trip on March 24th and 25th. That is in the attached packet. Again, those who are listed on the RSVPs, I do have a hotel room for you, so you are good to go there. So we plan on meeting at the Visitor Center at 8 a.m. on that Monday morning and leaving promptly at 8:30. We'll have lunch quickly at the 7 West Tap House in St. Cloud before touring the River's Edge Convention Center with Rich, who's the Assistant Building Manager, and then shortly thereafter, Rachel Thompson, who's the Executive Director of the Convention and Visitors Bureau there, will be meeting us as well. From there, we'll leave St. Cloud and head down to Rochester, where we will stay the night at the Hotel Indigo and spend dinner at Crave, and hopefully some of the staff from Visit Rochester will join us as well. In the morning, I have outlined a couple options for you. That's on your own. If you would like to have coffee or breakfast, totally up to you. And then we'll have a tour of the Mayo Civic Center at 8:30, leave Rochester around 11, and have a quick lunch in the cities before making our trip back to Fargo. And then I've also included the folks that we're going to be meeting as we make those stops in St. Cloud and Rochester. So if you have any questions, let me know. A couple things to note. If you do plan on paying for your own lodging, just give the credit card upon check-in. If that's something that you do choose, you don't have to. The CVB or Visit Fargo Moorhead will be covering the rest of those, so they're all already made reservations and direct billed to us. So we will also be paying for those 3 meals. The breakfast on Tuesday is on your own. And the only other thing to note that week is that we do not have a meeting that Friday, the 28th. So because we're gone Monday, Tuesday, we're just going to forego the meeting that Friday. So any questions, let me know.
Real quick, in terms of the visits for each location,
Sure.
Will we be getting sort of a packet of the detail of the things we'll be seeing and doing, so we can maybe prep and also see if there are questions that we want to add?
I believe it was the 28th of February. I gave most everybody one of these. I'm going to bring them again. It's just the map of the Mayo Civic Center, the Rochester River's Edge, so that we, you have reference, so you know the lay of the land and where we're going. They may have other content that they're going to share with us, but generally, any and all questions are welcome along the way. So, anything else? Any other questions?
Mallory, is that listed on the Convention Center webpage?
Yes.
You have shared? Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
You mean the agenda, this itinerary, or the
maps?
The maps, yes. Again, that landing page is searchable through the Visit Fargo Moorhead website. So if you pull that up, there is actually a list of, I think, a dozen or so other regional convention centers, and the River's Edge and the Mayo Civic Center are 2 of them. So you can link to those websites. Okay, I'm gonna check, is Tom Izinski, are you with us? All right, well, we'll just keep going. Hopefully he'll join us in a little bit. So again, if you have any questions for Tom, shout them out at any time, but we'll just kind of run through the RFP outline as it is today. So that is in the packet as well. It's got the big draft across the front of it. So I know, Jim Gilmore, you had some more information for us yesterday, so that document did not get added to this. So kind of that's what today is about, is just conversation about what should be in the outline of the RFP, and then we'll kind of go over this selection criteria on the back as well. So Jim, do you want to just share a little bit about what is on your document that might be different?
I think the one I was working on is just this concept of, do we want to have some general information on the sites and the concept before developers are required to put together detailed cost estimates and detailed pro formas? As Charlie mentioned, you may get a half dozen different proposals, but it takes a lot of money to put together conceptual designs or more detailed designs. And so maybe this first phase, we should be focused more on, for instance, just the description of the team. Who's going to do this? Do they have the qualifications, responsibilities, their previous projects? And then we'd want information on the site. What's the location? What's the size? Does the group have site control? Do they actually have an option on the site? And what's the site going to cost? Because that's going to affect our overall budget. So those are some of the details we need, for that first review. Then certainly, available infrastructure, available. We'd still want to see the concept drawings generally to see if it fits the site, but you wouldn't necessarily have to figure out where every, water cooler and restroom was, just an overall view for that first one. Certainly information on parking, pedestrian connections, that parking capacity, either on-site or adjacent. What's adjacent to the site as far as hotels, restaurants, shopping, attractions. So you'll see some overlap here, potential for private development, but as far as operating plans, more just a general idea how they would operate it rather than trying to get down to the exact pro forma. I think one thing we do need for the RFP is really, what is our budget? That's going to be the first question of the developers as they put this together. Is it, I'm kind of asking Susan, well, how much money will this fund raise? And I know she's going to be working with our financial advisors to try to get us kind of a number, because you don't want to start throwing in so many things, then you can't afford it, then you end up kind of having to start all over again. So those are some of my thoughts on what should be in that first phase. We'd then probably narrow it to 2 or 3 groups and then really get into the nitty gritty in terms of how exactly will it be operated, how long, all the details that need to be in that. But if someone's down to the final 2 or 3, then they're willing to invest more money in architectural drawings and putting together really probably a stronger proposal. So those are my thoughts. I just wondered if that kind of coincides with what you've been discussing. I've watched your meetings, but I haven't been able to be here the last 2.
I think there's going to be a bit of a challenge putting together the financial plan, because in order to do that, you need a bunch of assumptions. So clearly, if we are going to say of this annual hotel tax money, X% goes to fund a deficit or to subsidize it, then there's less money to build. And do we want to set that number? I had a conversation with Charlie about this a couple months ago. I don't know that that's wise of us to set a number or even encourage that. I mean, basically what's going to look like is the hotel tax is expected to bring this much money in every year. It can have some sort of growth assumption, but from that, we need to be able to build the facility. We need to be able to set aside some for an escrow account to take care of long-term capital so that doesn't become a problem later. And if in fact the different developers are doing pro formas that show a subsidy, somehow it needs to be taken into account. So that maybe means we have a smaller footprint. But those are decisions I can't personally make. I think we're going to need to have some conversation about that.
So through these conversations, I think the number that's been shared is somewhere between 40 and 45 million. Is that generally correct?
That was a number I told Charlie. That was just a very, very straight amortization schedule. It didn't include any surplus. It didn't include any escrow. I mean, there's other things we can do when we work with a bond counsel to set up our debt. It depends on when the tax is implemented. Are we going to be getting some tax in before construction starts, in which case we'd be able to pay some things with cash, so we need to bond less. Can you structure your debt so that you have more payments later when there's higher capacity? So I mean, there's just a lot of variables, and I think
Is that number with the considerations you're bringing up? Is that original number inclusive of what this new hotel would add to the intake of funds or not?
it is not. It was just, I don't have a pro forma, so it was just based on construction surplus.
On current?
Yeah.
Okay. It would seem to me that with the hotel as a requirement, and not considering that hotel's lodging tax payment, I think the question would be would we want some of that to be included in funding for the project over and above?
Well, it
kind of these
would, but I mean, any other hotel that comes on between now and then.
Right,
would also
right.
be included, so, yeah.
But to be what I would consider conservative, looking at our current lodging tax takings from the existing hotels we have, this individual project is sort of special because it's tied to the convention center and other potential developments. I would go in with that as kind of a separate discussion, and then any other hotels that get developed are sort of helping to cover things we might be not considering.
I'm not sure I'm following what you're saying.
Okay,
So the hotel
okay,
that's
the
attached-
current base of hotels, the lodging payments are going to pay at the 40 to 45 million. Right. Now we have a new hotel attached to the convention center. I would assume we'd want to decide whether or not we would be recommending to the commission or to these developers that part of that can go back towards making this project special.
I mean, they would be paid tax like any other hotel, and it goes into the bucket, correct? I don't know why that would be separate.
Well, I mean, when you look at like tax increment financing, it's usually the increased value within that district, that tax is separated out to pay the bond, correct?
That would be a separate issue, though, correct?
I get it's a separate thing, but the funding, the money, whether it's through tax increment financing or through a lodging tax, my question is was it calculated in what was needed to pay off a $40 to $45 million bond? And you're saying no.
I'm saying that we just used a general 2% growth increase of hotel tax, which could be because of additional hotels or increase in price or those sorts of things. So we did not specifically add that hotel.
Any other questions on that topic? Cool. Okay, so I just wanted to mention a few things. So from the last couple weeks that we had, those few people that joined us virtually and here in person, the 5 gals that were local planners from the YWCA, the Chamber, the United Way, and Ronald McDonald House. I took all of their suggestions and recommendations along with the 3 association planners from the state of North Dakota that we met with last week, and kind of integrated both of their ideas into the facility needs as well. So some of those things, obviously included like the loading dock. Someone had mentioned like 15 feet high, preferably. So some of those things are outlined here. So I don't know how detailed, again, to the point that was made about how detailed, Susan, we want to make everything, and if we want to be very specific or if we want to be general so that people kind of have the creative outlets to make their proposal. that's kind of the question at hand, is how much do we want to, drive say this is what has to happen versus letting people kind of make the decision. So I don't know if anybody has ideas or thoughts on that.
Can I chime in there quickly?
Yeah. Is that Kent?
Ken from Livewire here.
Okay.
Yes, I might just suggest that we explore looking at minimums for some of these things. Like, for example, you mentioned the loading dock height. Ideally, minimum height of 50, right? Or a minimum quantity of loading docks. I know we've discussed that at length at prior meetings. One piece that, I want to touch on here would be ceiling heights, in our primary multifunction space. For example, Delta by Marriott in Fargo has this, just under 16-foot ceiling height when it comes to their soffits in the space, that type of thing, right? We want to be much taller as a convention center. So I think minimums might be a good approach to some of these things, and then that still gives some creative freedom to developers.
Thank you, Kent. That's great input. Anyone else? Okay. On the back of that sheet then is also the selection criteria that was outlined. I wanted to kind of run through a little bit if there's any additions or omissions of things that you think that should be considered in those 4 categories of site consideration, urban, access, and finance, things that we might have otherwise missed, or again, this is just an outline that we are working off of from what Tom had shared with us. And then obviously also discuss a little bit more about the weight of each item and what is important to us compared to others in that criteria. So I'll just let you take a peek at that if there's any conversation on that.
Under finance, what does it mean by potential for city funding? What are we meaning there? I mean, clearly there's some hotel tax money going in there. How are we evaluating that? What else are we looking at there? What would be important to me is what's the bottom line? Is there going to be a subsidy needed, or how profitable will this be? Or
Mallory, I wonder if both on the sort of this previous conversation and this related to the criteria, are there individuals that are on the committee or with the city staff or your team or others who have some expertise or can sort of dig in to some of these and bring back to the group? So I don't know how productive we can be I can't be productive on some of these. I can have my opinion, but there may be something where, like Kent just commented, hey, I think this should be at this minimum because I work in this space. I do these things, right? I had somebody mention to me, do you need a kitchen that big? Maybe 9,000. Well, I don't know. But if somebody could come forward and give us a sense of, we really think these are the minimums, and then kind of decide as a group if we think that's important to the RFP. There's just a lot, this weighting came from a consultant, right? Based on, and we may decide because of somebody's experience in food and catering industry or somebody's experience with financing, that some of these weights would change, or the actual item may be removed in its entirety. I don't feel comfortable deciding that as much, but I don't know. Mayor, love to hear you and Denise's.
Well, I think Susan brings a good point. If financially it doesn't work, how much does that weigh, right? It could be a beautiful facility. It has a catering size. It has all the different sizes. And in the end, it's $1 million a year to the city of Fargo. Probably get a veto. I mean, no matter how many points you give them, right? So to your point, Joe, is it weighted appropriately to what is most important in this thing? And Dave, you brought up the other day, square footage or how big it is or all those types of things. We probably give credit if we have enough exhibit space, meeting space, different types like then. But what I'd like to know, Susan, is what's the biggest weight that we would take, right? If we get a great proposal, a beautiful facility, has everything in it that we want, but it's an anchor to the city's finances, would this committee say, yep, we're going to do it anyway? Because it doesn't work, but we're going to do it, right? And Dave, you've been on the Fargo Dome. We've been positive every year, right? And so when we do this weighting, I had the same question, Joe, is where do we give most of the weight? Because a lot of times what happens, Dave, we have this stuff where we weight stuff for the tax incentive committee and they get points for everything, right? But reality, when we look at that, oftentimes that's very helpful because if they have a certain amount of points, it needs our help. It helps make the city get better tax revenue, all those crazy things. But when it comes down to the bottom line, really on the tax incentive, it's money, right? It really comes to money. Is it something that will make the city money and ultimately pay higher taxes? Yes, it does. So my concern about whatever weighting we do is, Mike, I don't know who the right people have in the room, but to Joe's question is, how do you weigh it? And is there something that would veto it? If, and in my mind, from Susan's perspective, if it was going to be $1 million a year to the city of Fargo, we probably wouldn't really like that convention center, right?
Make that decision, not me.
And if we have some private developer who has a great hotel, great concept, builds it all together, maybe somebody brings a casino in, Joe, right? Does some crazy stuff, right? That might work better for us. So I like the weighting of it so we can kind of differentiate this developer, this developer, this developer. But I almost think you almost have to have two criteria. You have to have one, do you meet the requirements of the convention center? And then two, financially, how do they rank? Because it would help me in my sense of some people raise cackles about if we put it next to the Fargo Dome. Well, it might be next to the Fargo Dome at best economics, but that's part of what you have to weigh in there. So when the public criticizes and says, well, you didn't put it down South Fargo somewhere. Yeah, because it didn't cash flow properly for us. So I don't know, Mike, if we break it up a little bit to have, does it meet the criteria of what we have asked for in a convention center? And then two, let's look at the functionality of it. Can we weigh that different? So you may rank 150 that you got everything in it we wanted, but you might be minus 20 because financially you got to buy the land, we got to do this, we got to do that, got to do that. That makes it economically not feasible. Because to me, that'll be the question. Can you build the right thing? And is it economic feasible? But
can I just, Madam Chair or interim chair or whatever, a couple of things. So let's say hypothetically the number is 40 million. That's what they say. Well, the thing we have to think about is, so if the land acquisition costs, are they going to be subtracted out of that $40 million? So then we are going to be building less of a building if the land acquisition costs are higher from one site to another. So I think that's for all of us that we have to think about. The other thing is the ongoing, so once the building is built, the city of Fargo, we are in charge of the staffing. And so the costs for ongoing staffing, that's the concern. Because what we're hoping is it breaks even. That was the long range for the Fargo Dome. But I think we need to see what the financial plan is. Because for us, that's as much of a liability as the building. And then on top of that, you have to maintain the building. But those are a couple things to think about. 40 million, if the land costs are half of that, then we can only build a $20 million building. That's the thing. So, okay. And then one more thing, if you don't mind, and this is for Jim. So if we build, the parking is a big deal to me. And so to know, okay, if it's this capacity building, what kind of parking do we have to have? And Jim's we have people that's what they do is give us estimates for the number of spaces. And so I do think, even though that seems like that's kind of an extra thing, okay, and here's the other question. So the parking, is that going to be taken out of the $40 million too? If you need to have, let's say, a parking facility or, so Susan's already cringing when I'm making all this list, but it's like, no, those are all things that you all have to think about. So, all right, I appreciate it. Thank you for listening to me ramble.
I love it. When you start asking one question, it just always leads to another.
I think our criteria might, vary too for that first phase. I mean, that is, they brought up the cost of the site. That's going to be a huge criteria, and do they have control? And we also look at where is the site. I mean, if someone proposes a site out on 88th Avenue South and the city has to put infrastructure out there, that's not going to work either. So really you need to look at the existing infrastructure and what the site is. Some of these criteria, I think this is probably a good starting point, and I don't know if Susan and Michael and I could kind of work on this, but some of these, I mean, the compliance with zoning, that's really a pass-fail. You either comply or you don't. That's not really a criteria. And some of these others too, as far as, any height restrictions and that, you just, either you're under or it's important to look at, but some of these criteria are pass-fail more than trying to rank them.
Sure. Madam Chair, I have just a couple comments. One, going back to the RFP criteria, I would like, and it's probably in the final phase of the proposal that comes back from the 2 or 3 that are selected, but I just got back from a week-long meeting in Louisville, Kentucky, and the facility was amazing. What made it amazing was how it rebranded the entire state, and the look and the feel. I mean, it felt like Kentucky. And so I would like to see something in the request that includes the developer's shout out of differentiating special amenities, or, what makes it special, basically, is what I'm trying to get to, and how does it reinforce the uniqueness? I think that would be differentiating in our evaluation. And then the other thing that would be helpful for me, who's not normally in this world, is more criteria in criteria, what additional context or definitions, what do these sentences actually mean? What are examples? I mean, just kind of a cheat sheet to follow these, so we're all on the same page, because some of these seem pretty subjective.
For sure. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
That was kind of the hope if Tom were on the call to ask those questions, because this all came from him. So hopefully we can reschedule that if he's able to answer those kind of questions. Go for it.
So Denise, when you mentioned coming back, was it Louisville? Is that where
Pardon?
you were? Louisville?
Yes.
Kentucky. So is your comment in part about the area and how it looked and felt, or was it just the convention center?
Just the convention center.
Okay.
Because actually the surroundings were, it depended on which way you looked. Right? I mean,
Okay.
it was interesting, but once you were inside, you were completely enveloped in this experience.
Okay.
That's helpful, and it really was comfortable and energetic, right? And I
Yeah.
mean, it just, everything you wanted was there.
And the reason I ask is I know in one of the earlier conversations we all had, I think there was a comment about how much are we focusing the criteria on the convention center and its purpose and its value, when some of our earlier comments today were about sort of, I guess, the other property, the other development, and how that fits in. If a project like this outside the convention center generates $100 million of new property taxes, and they want a $20 million investment from the city versus a $25 million added value, right? So I don't know what the answer to that is in terms of our importance and criteria of the convention center versus what developers might be bringing forward in and around it, and the partnership they want with the city, short and long term. I just bring it up because, I've heard, talk of things that are the hotel, the surrounding area redevelopment, the convention center itself, and others. And I think we owe it to the developers to really find out what we're weighing here the most.
Back on the definitions, could Thomas provide us with written definitions by chance? I know we're going to have him on the call, but anything that we can reference written would be, would be extremely helpful.
For sure. Great question. I guess, Denise, to your point, as for someone who often travels to conventions and is, looking at it from a perspective of if and when in Fargo, correct? It's the experience. And I think that that's something that can differentiate location to location and building to building. It's not just the 4 walls of a convention space, but the way that you can, experience the destination in that way. So wonderful. Hi, Tom.
Hi, I'm sorry, I was joined on Teams and I had a Teams link and I was waiting on that for you to
Oh, no,
get
I
me into
apologize.
I realized I was on the wrong connection. So
No
my
worries.
apologies.
All right. Well, Tom Hasinski is the president and managing director of HVS. Thank you for joining us. We were just kind of discussing a little bit of the criteria that you had outlined in those 4 basic segments. Had some questions about actual terminology and definitions of some of those words. So
Great. Okay.
if you want to quickly just give an overview of that, and then we'll start asking a few questions.
All right. Well, yeah, the approach I suggested is one that we have used in a number of other situations to evaluate sites, was to actually try to come up with a numerical ranking of the sites. And so we typically create a set of criteria there's some that are common to all the projects we work on and some that may be very specific, but they fall into the general categories of site considerations, and those involve the capacity of the site, its buildability, if there are any environmental concerns, its zoning, and so on. And then another set of criteria that have to do with access, and for people, for vehicular traffic, for loading, whether there are any traffic congestion potential problems, and then another set that are related to urban impacts, like how does it affect the surrounding neighborhood, and are there any issues related to that? And then finally, financial ones, having to do with the cost of building on the site, a cost perhaps of acquisition, and other such criteria. So, and what we do is define the criteria and say, and give it a rank of 1 if it does not comply, and 3 if it complies, and a 2 if it partially complies. And then recognizing that not all criteria are of equal importance. For example, one might consider access to public transportation as being certainly less important than the capacity to build on the site. So we rank the importance of each criteria on a scale of 1 to 5. And then we just do the arithmetic and see how they come out. And the nice thing about that is that different people may rank sites with different priorities. And so the analysis can be run for different priorities and see which sites emerge as the most useful or most favorable. And what typically happens when we do that is that there are certain sites that emerge as stronger than others, and they kind of group, and there are ones that kind of work well and ones that don't. So we always try to interact with our clients to understand their priorities and any specific considerations that they may have. Like in Fargo, proximity to a rail line may be an issue because of noise. There could be noise issues, and that may not occur in other communities. So you would want to not just take a standard set, but make sure that your criteria are very specific to your community. So is that helpful?
Yes, thank you. One thing that was brought up, Mayor had asked about potentially having 2 separate kind of strategically thinking through the building and the land acquisition and things like that versus financials. Have you ever seen an experience like that where you have more like 2 separate buckets of criteria for a building, or is it generally just all one?
No, I think that would be covered in the different buckets we have. The financial, there would be a section on financial criteria, which might involve. So some of them are overlapping. So with a site, your ability to acquire it or to assemble it, let's say it's a site that has multiple owners, then it's probably one that's not easily assembled, right? But on the other hand, if you have public ownership, it might be a slam dunk to assemble the site. That's a separate issue from what it would cost to do that, and so you would have a criteria related to the cost and that are separate from the site-specific ones. But some of them overlap. Like, let's say one site requires environmental cleanup, or it's a difficult site to build on because it's topography, or maybe there's utility lines running through it. I don't know what could, a lot of things could happen. California, you worry about fault lines. I don't think that's an issue here, but flood zones could be an issue. So that buildability issue is also then a cost issue. Harder to build, the more expensive it's going to be if you had, let's say, to relocate utilities. So you'd want to deal with both of those issues separately. Yeah.
Hi, Tom. It's Susan Thompson. Not sure how much you've been kind of talked in on this, but one of the things we had discussed earlier was having kind of a two-phase approach to this RFP. The first being more conceptual so that we could vet it down to maybe the few that we start looking more into the weeds. Is that something you've seen before? What suggestions do you have on that?
Yeah, I think it can be phased in a couple of ways. One way it's phased is to do a first assessment purely on qualifications, or you could and create a short list and then ask for more detailed information. The other thing would be, I think, if you have some proposals that you seem very similar in terms of their overall attractiveness, like these are ones you really want to consider, then you could, and they've presented you with a concept for development of a specific site. You could then keep those one or three proposals shortlisted and ask for more detailed, probably getting more detailed financial analysis. So, I think one of the things you want to do in the RFP process is to only require a lot of work from the proposers that you're taking really seriously. So it's good to ask for less initially. Like, I think that doesn't require them to spend a lot of money in terms of site planning, architecture planning, or engineering work. And I think most developers can, without a lot of expense, come up with a rough concept for development on a specific site. But at that level, they wouldn't have a really very solid estimate of costs for the development, because that would require more detailed planning work, understanding maybe site conditions in more detail, making sure that it's there's not environmental issues, and you have to hire environmental consultants to do that, and then doing a more specific concept plan that you can do takeoffs on to get more solid estimates of costs. Then putting together a development schedule that could come at a later phase in the RFP process, and you would only ask a short list of maybe 2 or 3 firms to go to that level of detail in their work. Because then they're willing to do it because they have a higher probability of actually winning the RFP.
Can I ask a question? So, Tom, so I think our original concept was we were going to have the RFPs and then have a second round. That was kind of the concept. Does that make sense to you, Tom? Like, let's say that we have 7 or 8 finalists and then have a second round. So is that kind of what you're talking about, where it's, let's say,
Yes.
three finalists? Is that
Yeah.
make sense?
Exactly, yeah.
Then you'd have to have kind of almost two different RFPs. The first one would be, we want you to provide your location, your concept, who the players are, what you think the financial relationship could look like, that sort of thing. And then once you vet them, then you have the more detailed, I need an operating pro forma, I want some diagrams, that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, and some may be local developers, others may be not. And so I guess between the two, you would want to allow a little time for discovery on their part, so they may want to come to Fargo more and do a little more work on the site. So, I think you could allow some time between the two for them to actually come into the market if they haven't been there, and even meet with you, and then have them submit the more detailed proposal.
Can I just add one more thing? The other thing is, I do think it's important that when we get to those finalists, that you also do a financial evaluation of their horsepower and their capability of doing the project. Because we've had some experience in the past where somebody comes in with a great proposal, but it turns out that there's not much behind it. And so I just do think that's something for us to consider down the road too. Thank you.
Yeah. I think, you're getting into like the selection criteria. And when I was talking about site criteria, that would be a set of criteria related to just one issue. Have they selected the best site, right? But so in terms of selecting a developer, you would want to, their financial capabilities would be absolutely key. And issues like the overall quality of the development, whether it's achieving your goals, all of those issues, I think, would be, a set of selection criteria versus site selection criteria. I'm afraid that there may be we're talking past each other a little bit, because what I was referring to earlier in the conversation was strictly related to site, because that's what I had sent to Charlie, and he asked me to speak about today. So there's a whole larger issue, I think, of what criteria you apply to select the event planners, the developers. Yeah.
Tom, I think what we're going to see is that, certain developers have some options on certain sites. And so it's less ability for the city to select a site because we don't own anything that would necessarily work. And so, developer A will come in and propose on site one that they have an option on, and another developer come in and propose on another site. And so that first proposal will come together, will be a developer with site control. I think that's sort of what we're looking for in the first round.
Yeah. So let's say, for example, you got a developer with site control, but they're not experienced. They don't appear to have the financial wherewithal, right? So you might want to pick another developer that may have a more difficult time assembling the site, because everything else about their proposal is better. So, right. So I wouldn't, I mean, were you suggesting that like site control would be sort of a threshold criteria? If they don't have the site control, you wouldn't consider them, or?
I guess in my mind, that's what I'm thinking, because we need to know what the site's going to cost, because that's going to be a major factor. And if we don't know that, then it's hard to, I don't think the commission wants to go out and use eminent domain to acquire a site. And so we're going to have to, deal with a private owner who either does or does not want to work with the site.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that get to pick the developer who they're willing to work with.
Yeah. But what if they come to you and say, well, we've had conversations with the owners, and they're willing to talk with us about selling their site to us. I mean, they could demonstrate some potential for assembling the site, and they have a really great plan. Would you want to consider them? It's definitely not as good as having control, but that could be outweighed by other factors, right?
It just seems like site control is a pass-fail. If you don't have control of the site, you just don't have a proposal.
Yeah. Well, then I would, if that's the consensus on what you want to do, then you should not even, you should make that a criteria for submitting a proposal. Like you have to, but that may eliminate some potentially good developments, you know.
I guess I'm looking at the commissioners. Is that kind of what you're agreeing with what I'm saying, or do you have some different thoughts?
Is there a metric that is like ability? Like I know you said ability to acquire the site. Can we measure how easy or hard it is? Like if they have it or don't have it? Like it could be a guarantee, but it's not entirely sure. And to his comment about omitting out projects that could be positive.
I mean, I just think if someone, you know, if we have a great development team and they've picked a site, but the owner won't sell, you know, we're not going to really go forward.
Well, and it's like ease of acquiring, like there's
Yeah,
potential
and
for
if
them
there's
to
a really
sell.
good site and a really bad, or a developer with no capability, you're probably not going to get that you're probably not going to select that either. At least I'm trying to read the commission's mind here.
But does that only allow people that actually own a site then to bid? Is that, I mean, if they have a concept or partnership with someone else and some options and?
They would have to have an option on the land. I mean, that's very common in, you know, development.
Yeah. Well, I don't think there would be any developers that would propose if they didn't have a realistic opportunity of acquiring a site. But it's just that they may not have control at the time they propose.
You could have a site where they've given multiple developers the option to acquire for a set price. You know, if it's a really good site, some owner might be willing to sell to developer A, B, and C, you know, depending on which proposal the city likes the best. I'm just trying to avoid us from picking a site we think is great and then the owner doesn't want to sell and we waste 4 months.
Right.
Or the site's too expensive.
But wouldn't actual control and securement of whatever site is be confirmed in the second round? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, either they have it or they don't,
Yeah.
then at that point. And if they don't, they're not viable as a candidate anymore. So I mean, part of me is reluctant to just be so literal of site control here and eliminate a really good possibility.
Yeah, you could have a scenario where a developer initially proposes but doesn't have an option on the site and comes back in the second round and says because they're shortlisted, they're willing to buy an option on the site. So yeah, I think a developer could move from less likely to control the site to more likely in a second round. Yeah.
Tom, in terms of timeline, currently our goal is to have an RFP out by the end of April and then shortlist, as we kind of mentioned, or get an RFQ, any questions from developers by the end of May, and then have all proposals into us by the end of July. Is that, you know, what are your thoughts on that as far as, you know, how quickly we're allowing developers to respond with their first RFP or their first proposal and moving through to the next phase? Because I know you had mentioned like some people may want to actually visit Fargo if they're not from the area, and do those sites of those kinds of site visits. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, from the question of how you might be perceived in the development community, if you make it a really short timeline, the reaction is, oh, this is wired. They're just doing it fast because they've already selected somebody. That's when developers see really short timelines, that's the way they react, and they might not even bother responding. So I think for the first phase, like to have the RFP on the street for 4 to 6 weeks makes sense. So that would take you through mid-May, and then part of the schedule also depends on the speed with which you then evaluate those proposals. So if you took 2 weeks to do that, and then you issued by the second round, shortlisted and second round, you could give another 4 weeks or so, and that would take you, or 6 weeks. That would take you to the end of June before you could have responses by the end of June on the second round. That strikes me as a reasonable schedule. Yeah. And then, of course, then you have to evaluate, and then the negotiations begin. And you could even choose then to keep 2 proposals in the works, and you get another round, start negotiating, or because there is public incentives going into this, right? So that's where the issue would come in. Is like, well, can you negotiate a better deal where they're asking for less incentives than one, less incentives than the other? So you might want to, even after that second submission, you could have the option of not selecting until you do some negotiation with either one of them. Yeah.
Tom, just a question. When you go buy a house, you buy a real estate agent that represents you or goes forward in that regard. When we're doing a convention center, none of us in this room have built a convention center. Is there sometimes somebody else that would be like a broker for a convention center? Because concern is, if you get in the market of convention centers, that's a dynamic market, right? That changes over time. Different things happen. I think of the pro basketball, and the experience has changed. It used to be sitting in a seat watching the game, but the more audience now likes a team sport where you have a club space where you can visit and talk and watch the game. Plus, if there's a great basket, it comes on the big screen, so you never miss anything in that experience. My curiosity, is there somebody who has some expertise in convention centers that basically could help this committee do some of this? Because it seems to me it's not only the space, but I think you just mentioned it, Commissioner Kolpak, it was the experience in the space that really sold you. So my curiosity, is there some companies out there that actually broker convention spaces?
Well, I don't think it's termed brokerage, but that's what we do, and not to be too self-serving, it's what some of our competitors do as well. So we understand what makes a good convention center and what doesn't, and we have helped other public entities through this. But because you're absolutely right, you're only doing this once, and so a lot of the issues you face are just new to you. So having someone on your side, that a professional that's evaluating this, I think is really important. Because we can see flaws in proposals and concept design, and we can delve into their financials and see if they make sense. One of the things is, how is this going to be operated, and will it require ongoing support? And are they going to be asking for that? Is that a realistic request? Are there projections of utilization? Are they good? Are they realistic? Or are they selling you it's kind of a Pollyannish view of how this is going to work. And I think if you have someone like us on your team, then we can help you evaluate the quality of their response.
So I have a question. So it almost might be appropriate to have an RFP for that, because I think everybody here, we all are looking forward to it, but when you start looking at all the things, it's a little overwhelming. And for us to be the ones deciding that, it's a little overwhelming. And so I do think to hire somebody to advise us, I think that would be money well spent. But I don't know how it will go, and maybe we need to talk to the CVB and the city about looking, and maybe we have to go out for a RFP or something like that. But I do think just when you started looking at the kitchen, all the minutia that you had to look at, and for all of us, we're like, I don't know how many knives we need if you have this many people. And so I think to have some assistance, even though we have expertise in lots of these areas, the overall, I think that would help us. So I don't know what everybody else thinks, but I think that would be money well spent.
Yeah, I
Mallory,
agree.
is the CVB already have some of this under contract? Maybe you can go over that again.
I was just looking at Claire because I know you guys, as the board, kind of approved this. I don't know exact numbers. Was it? I'm not sure. I'm so sorry.
We went over it very, very briefly the last meeting. It was more of Charlie saying, "We good? You good?" And we said, "Yep, we're good."
Okay,
So I
so-
don't have the specifics. I apologize.
That's okay. Yeah, there is an investment from Visit Fargo Moorhead in the working with Tom and figuring out some of those logistics that, again, are above our heads on details that we wouldn't otherwise know about. So, yes, we're in the works on that. But I guess between Claire and I, we're not exactly sure what that investment looks like.
But that could be a partnership with the city, because, sure, CVP do it, but we always get into this conflict of interest, right? I mean, is that your best conflict or is that in our best conflict? But to Dave's point, the city also has an obligation to make big choices on this. And if we had to do an RFP and a company to advise us, then an RFP on the process, maybe it's a 4-week deal, because I think, as Tom would say, there's not a lot of people in that market space. So we might be able to sort that out rather quickly. But you're really looking for advisor, Dave, is what you're talking about. So a little different than looking at the convention center itself. But I do think the partnership with the city, that we could work with you on that, because I think that's part of the question, Dave. You don't know how many pieces of silverware you need. I don't know that either. You know how to run a good restaurant, right? But then it is a little hard when we start saying this is an event center, right? I mean, it's a little different. So we want to get it right. So,
Yeah, and I think there's two levels, there's different types of expertise you would need. In the RFP stage, in the selection stage, I think it's more people like my firm that do market analysis and financial analysis and have fundamental understanding of what makes a good convention center. Once you approve the development, when the project actually starts getting designed, then there may be engineering, architectural, and food and beverage experts that can count the knives and the forks. That's a different set of skills, specialized skills that you may want to bring in at that point. So I think the RFP process is more of a market generalized and focused, and then the later development, it depends on what the overall development deal is in terms of what you need, in terms of, are you going to be owning the conference piece, and therefore do you need an owner's rep during the construction process? So those decisions could wait till later to get the expertise, architectural and engineering expertise on your side that you may need during the development process. But right now, I think you're just getting you through the selection process and then moving forward from there. I apologize for joining late, and I have another call stacked up to this in 1 minute. So,
all right. Well, thank you, Tom. We appreciate it. If there's other questions, we'll get them your way. So appreciate your time.
Please don't hesitate to ask. we love working with you and Charlie, and we want to continue to help move this forward. So thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Bye.
Oh, unless there's anything else, yeah, have a great weekend. Thanks.